Дня.
Доброго дня всім, дякую, що приєднуєтеся.
Доброго дня.
Добрий день.
Добрий день.
Дякую.
Доброго дня.
Ми дамо вам хвилинку для того, щоб приєднатися, щоб всі учасники могли доєднатися. Нагадую, що у нас є трансляція на YouTube і також буде запис. Добрий день. Отже, ми можемо розпочинати. Дякую, що приєдналися. Сьогодні наша остання зустріч в рамках проєкту «Освіта у воєнний та післявоєнний час». І я рада, що ви всі дійшли до останньої зустрічі і були з нами весь цей час. Сподіваюся, що отримали дуже багато корисних матеріалів. І сьогодні просто буде бум такий з великою кількістю корисних матеріалів, якими поділилися наші експерти і які ми переклали для вас. Тому у вас буде доступ до матеріалів українською мовою і англійською мовою. Про це трошечки згодом, а я хочу нагадати трошечки вам про Education USA Ukraine. Education USA – це мережа інформаційних центрів, яка надає консультації стосовно вступу у вищі заклади США. І якщо ви зацікавлені, хотіли дізнатися інформацію про те, як вступити в США, як отримати стипендію, як отримати грант, як отримати студентську візу, будь ласка, підписуйтесь на нашу розсилку і звертайтесь до наших соціальних мереж. Ми з радістю поділимося цією інформацією з вами. Нагадаю, що всі послуги Education USA Ukraine безкоштовні, тому ви можете записуватися на безкоштовні консультації і дізнаватися всю необхідну інформацію. І, як я сказала, сьогодні наша остання зустріч в рамках проєкту «Освіта у воєнний та післявоєнний час». І дякую, що ви були весь цей час з нами. Декілька слів про наступні кроки, які відбудуться після цього вебінару. Після вебінару кожен з вас отримає форму відгук, яку необхідно буде заповнити до 22 травня включно, це понеділок. Якщо ви пам'ятаєте, то умовою отримання сертифікату було подивитися або бути присутніми принаймні на 8 з 10 вебінарів. Тому якщо ви відчуваєте або знаєте, якісь вебінари пропустили, то ви можете все переглянути за посиланням, яке надходить на вашу пошту. Після цього отримати сертифікат і написати нам, якщо у вас з'явились будь-які питання або проблеми. І також не пропускайте наші наступні можливості, вони будуть незабаром. Сьогодні я рада представити наших експертів Френсіс Стетсон і Бекі Мошгет, які з радістю будуть представляти сьогодні тему стратегії навчання в класі для учнів та вчителів з урахуванням травми і поділяться просто величезною кількістю корисних матеріалів. Я сподіваюся, що вони будуть для вас в нагоді і ви зможете використовувати їх у своїй роботі. Тож, Френсіс і Бекі, дякую, що приєдналися і дякую, що сьогодні з нами. Надаю вам слово.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon where you are. We're in Houston, Texas, and again, I'm Frensis Stetson, and this is Beki Mошгет, and we are so excited to be here. We've been planning now for several months, and have been looking forward to it. One of the things that I think when we think of the word teacher is it's such an important role. It's actually leads, as we all know, it directs our society, our all the careers in our countries, all of the knowledge base. And one thing that I have to say is that Becky and I want to say to you is that when we think we know what trauma means, because our topic today is trauma-informed classrooms, we know that we don't know trauma the way you do. And so we may say something that sounds kind of foolish to you because we don't have the experiences that you have with war trauma. So what we've really tried to do today is really look at what we brought you and to make sure that these are strategies and tools that you can use every day in your classrooms or use in your interactions with your students. So that we hope that we're translating our own understanding of trauma-informed classrooms so that it's really helpful to you. So with that in mind, we have a number of let's see, objectives that we want to talk about very quickly. You know, teachers always start by making sure that their students understand what the learner objectives are. So we have these in your materials, but basically, let me say that the next hour and a half is going to be pretty much 3 different components. The first one is going to be with Becky, and she's going to be talking about the learner characteristics of traumatized students and how we can work to minimize that trauma for them in our classrooms so that they have a really productive learning time. I'll come in second because there are a number of strategies, teaching strategies, that really help us create more differentiated instruction. In other words, the instruction that you design so that it really meets the needs of your students. And so we've brought quite a few very practical strategies that we hope you can turn around and use tomorrow. And then we'll return back for a few minutes with Becky, because we'd like to end with an idea about how, in fact, you can engage self-care for yourselves. You all are going through a great deal too at the same time. So those are our 3 very broad objectives, and we look forward to sharing them with you. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over now to Becky, and this is her first portion of our 3-part series. Becky?
Thank you, Dr. Stetson, and thank you for having us today. So when Dr. Stetson and I got together to look at this project after Osana contacted us, we looked at a few things. One, we started with really looking at the task of learning and how critical academic skills really require several things. One, the ability to attend, the ability to really listen, to organize, and then to remember. And we got to thinking about that and realized that both students and teachers are severely challenged as we attempt to carve out a positive learning environment. So as we look at this framework, we're going to look at trauma specifically, and we're going to work with this definition. So trauma is the unique individual experience of a single event, a series of events, a set of enduring conditions in which an individual's child or a child's ability to integrate his or her emotional experiences is overwhelmed, and the experiences can offer threat to life or sanity. By definition, that's what trauma is. Francis? Whoop, back up one. Okay. So we're going to look at these 3 components, but before we do that, trauma has an impact in the classroom, and the 3 primary impacts that we're going to look at is really difficulty concentrating and staying focused, avoiding of people or places that remind them of traumatic events, and we might see this as students trying and wanting to isolate themselves, or acting out or becoming aggressive or withdrawn. So there are 3 types of trauma that we'll look at today. Very briefly, I would wager to say that in your situation, you're experiencing all of these traumas. The first one is acute. And acute trauma is one single event or one stressful event that is perceived to be dangerous. The second is chronic. Chronic is continual trauma. So it's the result of repeated or prolonged trauma. And the third one is complex trauma. And complex trauma is a combination of many traumas altogether. So we have had probably 20 good years of really researching the brain, and what we've learned about trauma and the connection of the brain is really pretty fascinating. What we have learned is that, and we go back to studying the brain long ago, we knew that there was a fight or a flight mechanism within the brain. But we know that trauma causes an increase of cortisol in the brain, which causes eventually, if prolonged, lower brain volume and impaired memory. The one thing that we have learned about cortisol is that when it rises into your psyche or into your brain, when you're constantly facing stress, your cortisol levels remain elevated. They never have the opportunity to lower, which brings you back down to a feeling of peace or calm. And so what is happening for many of our students and our adults is that over time, trauma can change the structure of the brain if it's not relieved. So it does have a developmental impact on our young students. There's 5 fundamental truths about trauma. And the first one is that trauma is real. And I don't need to tell you all, as Francis stated earlier, trauma is real, very real in your lives. I was looking at some current statistics this morning, and the statistic that stood out for me is that there's 7 million people right now in the Ukraine that are internally displaced. Over 7 million people have also fled the country. But of the internally displaced people in your country, 2.5 million of them are students or children. So trauma is real. The second point is that trauma is prevalent, especially in a war-torn country. I want to just read one quote that I found this morning, brought to us by UNICEF or SOS Children's Villages. And it's this: mental health supports are absolutely necessary for the children and students of the Ukraine. Their lives have been virtually uplifted, uprooted, and for some destroyed. They face grave risk to their physical, mental, and social well-being. They are in need of psychosocial support as they battle acute stress, social isolation, depression, and mounting anxiety. So although we know that children are resilient, educators need to be prepared to support students who've experienced trauma. In your case, all your students have, and all your adults have experienced trauma. Lastly, children are resilient, and within positive learning environments, they can grow, they can learn, and they can succeed. Francis?
I know. I don't know what happened.
No, something
Go
did.
back. I know, so don't worry. I think I've got it.
Well, so today we're going to give you the best perspective that we have. As Dr. Stetson mentioned, you know, you are experiencing things that we in America, at least in our generation, really have not experienced. But what we do know and how we can connect with you is that we know that the impact of trauma for you continues. Okay? One thing that we want to talk about is what we call dysregulation. And dysregulation, by definition, is the inability of a person to control or regulate their emotions or their feelings or their responses to external stimuli. So consequently, behaviors results. Some of these behaviors we'll see in adults. They would be anxiety, panic attacks, excessive self-blame, eating disorders, even because they want to control what they can control, an inability to tolerate feelings, addictions, distractions, self-harm, perfectionism, and even suicidal thoughts and feelings. In children, we're going to see a little bit of a different response. And the primary response that we're going to see in our students is that they shut down, that there is a spaciness about them, that they might become angry, rage, have excessive temper, experience nightmares or sleeping problems, become controlling, difficulty in focusing and learning, which is one that we looked at a little bit earlier. They have unreasonable fears or new fears, and psychosomatic disorders like stomach aches or headaches. In the end, increased distress, they're irritable and they're whiny, and definitely out of balance. So when we look at a trauma-sensitive school, there are 3 things that we want to look for especially. We want to first focus on safety. How do our students come to us and feel safe? There's a concept in education, as you know, called absence of threat. And that's when you're in a situation where you can walk in and you feel safe and in control. And because of the absence of threat, You have the ability and the wherewithal to focus on and the resources inside of you to learn. When our students don't come to us with that feeling of safety or that feeling of threat, it's very hard to pay attention, to focus, and to move forward in a positive learning environment. The second thing in a trauma-sensitive school, a hallmark is to prioritize relationships, to focus on relationships. Caring and supportive people around our students is what we will focus on. And then finally, look for the emotions behind the behavior and understand that managing the behavior is not enough. There's going to be challenges, there's going to be obstacles in this behavior, but we have to understand that we have to still give them opportunities to belong and feel safe. Francis? This quote, trauma-sensitive practices are not as much about using new and different strategies with students as they are about understanding and accepting a child's story and his or her needs. Every student comes to us with a varied background. Every student will come to us with a different experience during this time of stress and trauma. So it's meeting them where they are so that you can move forward together. And the important part of this quote right here is moving forward together, because it will take all of us moving forward together.
Oh,
okay. When we talk about moving forward together, we really are going to talk about positive relationships. And this quote says, the relationships we forge and maintain with others are essential to our collective and individual success. What stood out for me in this quote is that it says, it takes all of us. It will take all of us, people from the United States, like Francis and myself, you as teachers, students working together. It takes everybody to build a positive relationship. But one thing that we do know that there are some key elements in building that relationship, and you as teachers, these are your 4 actual domains. First of all, your presence. Your presence is important to each other as we support our colleagues, but also present. Your presence is important for our students. You need to be there. You have to be in the moment with these students. I know one thing about working with students and young people is they know when they're unwanted, and they know when you don't care. We do know that. One thing you do have is your presence. Keep your mind on what you're doing with that student. Don't let it wander about the curriculum you might have to plan or even dinner plans. Be present. The next thing you have as a teacher is power. You're not going to be able to change things, but you are going to be able to influence them. So you as the teacher really do have the power to set the boundaries in your classroom and to keep your students as safe and comfortable as you possibly can. And I know this about you all, that you have the strength to follow through. The third thing would be warmth, and that is to demonstrate understanding simply, to understand where a student might be. You may not understand it 100%, and you may not know all the details about where that student is, but we can be warm and caring. And the last thing is connecting. Be intentional. Make sure that you focus on the students individually, connect with them, get to know them a little bit. And Dr. Stetson's going to share some tools with us in a little bit about actually getting to know our students better. Ready? So in building our relationships, there's a few things that we can do, and we've provided resources for you for these things. The first thing is to conduct class meetings, and we actually have had that document translated, I believe, and that will give you a step-by-step instruction on how to develop a class meeting, which will in turn build the culture in your classroom to be one that is safe and trauma sensitive. Again, focus on trust and safety. And finally, connect before you correct. So all of these will be in some handouts that you have. We've given you a handout for a trauma-sensitive classroom. All right, so we're going to attend to our relationships now, as we talked about a minute ago. Dr. Stetson's going to come in just a moment, and she's going to give us a student inventory, I believe. And we're going to look at some questions like, what are our students interested in? How can I connect? How does the student learn best? What are the goals that the student might have? When has the student been successful, especially if they're not being successful now? Let's look back and draw back to a time knowing that student when they were successful. Who in your building or on your campus has the student connected with the most? Maybe that's a person that you'd want to go and consult with and find out just how to connect with this student. How often do you interact with this student beyond academics? Sometimes having our students in our homes is important. Sometimes going to their home or visiting them or seeing them outside of school is a way to connect with our students. In the United States, we would say sports would be good. I'm not sure to what level that's available to you all now, but that's one area that we could do. What has been the most helpful intervention for this student so far? How can we invest and attend to our relationship? So we've given you some strategies, and we're going to review them right now. We can teach coping skills to manage stress. There are many, many opportunities online to learn stress management skills, teach those to our students in the classroom. 2, we can schedule and provide opportunities for our students to regulate. We talked about dysregulation, but we could probably talk, if we had more time, which we don't, talk about opportunities to learn to help our students regulate. You'll find lots of resources on that as well. And finally, of course, create safe and calming spaces. Again, that would be being intentional and considering our environment and the needs of our students. Regulation breaks are something that anyone can do any time of the day, and they're very important for the health and the welfare of both the teacher and the student. And the first one is to build times and activities into your day to help that student regulate. That would be taking a quick break, do a quick check-in, do a movement exercise. When we move and breathe deep, our brain automatically re-regulates, and most of our students are in dysregulation, as we talked about. The second one would be to structure your day so your students don't get overwhelmed. Pace it, pace your day. We don't, academics are important, of course, and that's why we're here, but we first must need the social emotional skills of our students in order for academics for them to have the wherewithal to have the academic piece. Third, have a process for students when they need a break, and always allow them to take that process. A quiet place in the classroom, a walk down the hall, a drink of water, something, but have a process in place. And 4, make social and emotional competencies part of your instruction every day. This next slide talks about looking at social emotional learning and how it should be the very basic foundational part of what we do when we teach, probably before we teach. And one of the points is to make talking about feelings and emotions and what your body is sensing, the sensations of happening right in you right now, as a part of your everyday vocabulary. Help give them words. Be sure to also make sure that we're using age-appropriate language. With a younger child, you would say something quite different than you would with someone who's in secondary school. Teach and use tools for monitoring emotional regulation and responses to stressors. And again, some of these tools have been provided for you. We don't have time to go through them all this morning, but you do have them in a translated handout. Teach and use prevention and de-escalation strategies. Important with our students. Our students need to have the ability to express themselves, and then someone caring, an adult caring, to help them regulate again, of course. Empower our students by allowing them access to calm corner, break spots, something in the classroom of comfort for them. So this should all be considered before we actually look at the educational piece of our presentation this morning. And right now, Dr. Stetson is going to come and move to the academic strategies that we're going to provide for you today.
Thank you, Becky. That was really helpful. And I couldn't help but think how practical and really common sense some of them are. And sometimes those get lost in the trauma of the day. So thank you for that. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Wait, it's afternoon where you are. I also have been thinking about all of you in the audience, and you are expert teachers. I just heard from Oksana that many of you could have participated in as many as 10 webinars over the last several months. So, you know, you're already, of course, at master status as teachers. And of course, you're also very dedicated to spend a whole day working. And now at the end of the day, you're joining this webinar. So welcome. And I look forward to sharing with you some of the tools that I know many of you know because you are good teachers. I think a lot of good teaching is just intuitive. You just know how to grab the student's attention and how to convey information that they need to learn in order to be successful in school. So I want to tell you that our firm has done an awful lot of work in the area of differentiating instruction. And I love this whole body of knowledge because it is, as I said earlier, a real practical set of strategies that teachers can engage in. And my subtitle is to bring learning within the reach of every student, because when there was some research done many decades ago that was repeated recently. And it's found that very often in classrooms, we are delivering instruction, sometimes the same way, the same every day, day in, day out, and maybe even the way we were taught ourselves. And so there's such a press here for us to expand the use of different strategies during the instructional day to make it more interesting for our students and more effective for our students, but also for us as teachers. So how do we bring learning within the reach of every student? Well, I want to start with your tool. Now you have this in your packet, and I want you to know we're going to come back and forth to it because this is something that we're kind of proud of. It's an instructional design tool, and it is what you need on one piece of paper, believe it or not. If you want to differentiate your instruction, this is an excellent tool for you as teachers, because if you look at the top, it has you write down your unit objective. What are you teaching today? Or what are you teaching in this unit? So you jot that down. And then what are you going to accept as a teacher when you finish teaching this unit that would be evidence that your students have mastered your content? So not only, I love this, beginning with what are you teaching, but beginning at the very start to say, what will success look like at the end of this unit on photosynthesis or the history of our country or any topic that you are teaching? What will that look like? What will my students be able to learn or to demonstrate? Then, and one of the things that is very important, and this is where we brought you a number of things you can take back and use tomorrow, is how do we pre-assess what our students learn? That's a real key, I think, in trauma-informed classrooms too. The degree to which repetition is needed for some youngsters and then not for others. Youngsters want us to move on, go on with the content, and some others are really needing some more time to be learning the content. So one of the best tools that teachers have is to pre-assess, what do my students know as I'm starting this unit? Before I even begin to teach, what do my students know? So we're going to look at how you do that, some of the strategies that you use for pre-assessing. The other thing that's part of this, I want you to notice is part of my favorite part. And that is, what do we know about our students' learner characteristics? What are their interests? What are their motivations? We're going to be looking at Gartner's multiple intelligences inventory and student interest inventories, ways for you as teachers to create a list of your students, and then have, I think on a grid would be an easy way to do it, but have the learner characteristics so that you can see this. Ultimately, you're going to use that knowledge about what students know now about your content, and also how they learn and how they make sense of their world in the way that you design your lesson. So this is really, really effective, and teachers really cannot ignore this part. And I know you'll agree when you see a little bit further about what I'm talking about. Now, this whole midsection right here, once you are real clear on what you're teaching and what success looks like and where my students are starting, this next big section is really powerful. The basic question that the instructional strategies and activities is asking you is, as a teacher, how do you plan to teach this? What are you going to do? Maybe you're going to have a small group discussion about how this skill or this concept that I'm teaching and why it's important to students. How will they use that in their everyday lives? Then perhaps you go to a short lecture on the topic, and then you may break them into small groups for completing some question and answer pieces. So right here in sequence of how you're going to teach the activity or the concept is all the various strategies. Now, we brought you a document that has about 50 different strategies for teaching, and you can choose whatever works for you and for your students. And I love the fact that there are about 50 of them, because you will be able to adjust them and integrate them into what you already do. You already have at least, I'm sure, 30 strategies of your own, if not more. And so you can add, if we've brought you anything new, you can add that to it. But here's where you say, as a teacher, how am I going to structure the instruction that I'm going to deliver? And then one of my favorites is what this research also found that I was commenting about earlier, is that, that we have to be careful and vary the grouping approaches that we use. If we all just do whole group instruction and lecture at every class period, we're going to lose our students, and we're not really reaching their interest and so on. So this is exciting, because to me as a teacher, I like to have this visual, because if I notice throughout the day or the week that I'm relying almost exclusively on just one of these grouping strategies, then I know for myself, I need to adjust my strategies so that I can have different grouping approaches. And we'll talk about each of these in just a few minutes. And then finally, how am I going to assess for each of the sections? Remember, I said perhaps your first activity is to put them into small groups and discuss, why is this content relevant to me and my practical life? Well, then you would do that check small group. And then when you go to assess, maybe you would have them put their responses on flip charts or post-it notes on the wall as they leave the classroom. But how are you going to assess their current level of knowledge? We'll come back to, of course, each of these, but I will tell you that one of the best parts, I think, of this format is that all teachers know when we design our lessons is that it's probably going to be really effective for hopefully 80 to 85% of our students. But you and I know that we have students that really are struggling. And so this is a chance, this bottom part of this form here is the opportunity for us as teachers to say, who might require some additional support, and put their names, like Anya or Joseph or whomever the student's name would be. And then we're going to study this in a few minutes about some of the extra hints or extra helps that we can provide to students. So it's really, I almost call it, it's like magic. It just really helps every student reach the content that you're teaching. I'll also say that you may have several students that are way ahead of the classroom. They have mastered the content that you're teaching some school years before, because they're quite gifted and are just really tuned into the subject. So we can also adjust what we give them, making it more challenging. So this is just sort of a one page does it all. And now we're going to share with you some of those strategies. And so I created this for you. I'm not going to read it to you or anything, but what I want you to see is that this is when I give you examples to apply to that form, the instructional design tool, we're going to be talking about the student characteristics, the pre-assessment. And so on this form, I've given you where you see indented, the various types of tools that we're going to give you that you'll have from this unit. So this is, I'm not going to read from it or talk about this right now, but you're going to see all of these different content areas. Okay. Now, imagine in your mind, I don't know, I'll tell you what, would you all just jot the number in the chat box for our facilitators? What is the average number of students that you have in your classroom? The average number, and I know you're secondary teachers, so generally speaking, you have classes that change every, I understand, 45 minutes. So what's the average number of students that you have in your classrooms? All right, I'm going to have you put it in the chat box, and I think there are about 138 of you this afternoon. So everybody put a number in there, and I'm going to ask our facilitators in a few, we'll give you about 15 seconds. This is not a tough question, to report out what the average numbers seem to be. Okay, please use the chat box. Okay, good. More of you are joining in with the chat box. Wonderful. Thank you. Got another 5 seconds. Okay. Oksana, what are the numbers looking like?
Отже, у нас є цифри від 10 до, зараз не найбільше, 30, 32, 34, 28, 25, 34,
Okay.
абсолютно різні, да, 15.
All right, thank you all. I'm going to stop there. Unless you see, Oksana, a really big number or a really tiny number that you should mention. We're going to say that the average would range from small numbers, then up to 15, and then maybe the average is about 30 students, would you say? Just
32.
Oh, all right. Okay. That's like it is here in our country at secondary level. And that tells you how hard you work all day long, because every one of your classes, you have a pretty high number of students that are needing you to differentiate your teaching so that they're successful in their learning. All right. With that in mind, notice that this is a student profile that is on our screen. And what I want you to notice is that, and you're going to be able to change this any way you want that matches your needs as a teacher. But in this one that we prepared, you have the name of the student, the grade level, and so on, but we have readiness levels. So in reading, is the student above, at, or below? We didn't make this difficult. You're not having to put in grade level reading information, but in writing, math, science, where are they generally performing? And this is for your use. This is not necessarily for the student at all, this piece right here. You can indicate what your various sources for information are, but here is what their interest. What are their hobbies? What are their motivators? I remember teaching a class where I had a student that came, it was in middle school, and he came to school with a fireman's badge on. He was really kind of too old to dress like a fireman, but he wanted to grow up and graduate from school and be a fireman. And I knew that every example that I needed to give to Harry, when that had to be around to really get his attention, it would be something about the math problem or the English problem or what have you. It would have to be around being a fireman. If I used that, I had his attention. So special interest, Star Wars were in those years very big. The learner characteristics. Now these I'm going to be giving you the tools for. It's very difficult to find free documents that allow you to find learning characteristics or predominant intelligence. So I'm going to show you those in a minute. And then This, I think, would be helpful in terms of self-management strategies. These kids are at secondary level, and you want to know, and you get to decide, and probably need to do this maybe twice or maybe even 3 times a school year. This bottom part, in terms of interpersonal skills with peers, is it strong, adequate, or needs improvement? I really like this piece for you as a teacher, because you're going to have a glance and you're going to have a lot of information that's really helpful to you about each of your students. Now, let me show you the instruments that will give you this information. All right, here is one called the Learning Styles Inventory. Am I an auditory learner? Am I a visual learner? And I really am personally a visual learner. If my teachers had not found a way to teach me that gave me lots of visuals, I think I'd still be back in 1st grade. It was that powerful to me as a learning tool, is to really be able to use my vision and my visual cues to learning. So we know there's auditory, there's visual, tactile, kinesthetic, and so on. Now, this next one is Howard Gardner has written a great deal on multiple intelligences. And his theory is that we want to, that there are 8 of them. There's only 4 shown on this piece of paper, but you have all 8 in your packets. Some of them are, for example, horticultural. You know, are you, as this child or student, are real involved in nature? So there are different 4 other categories. But I think kids love this one, because do you have exceptional expertise? If so, you give yourself a score of 4. All the way down to no expertise at all is a 0. So the students can rate themselves in these different categories. And of course, for each of these items, you're going to have he or she is going to have a total at the bottom. So the higher number naturally shows you your predominant multiple intelligence category. Kids really like this. Now, let me pause here a minute about why I think teachers really like this instrument. You know, we know as teachers, we know the word metacognition, and that is studying or learning the way we learn. And I think this is very helpful for especially our secondary students to really key in on how they learn best. And this is a wonderful document for that. And I think, as a matter of fact, I would also advise, when I use this with students, I like to then, after they've completed it, I like to periodically group them by each of these categories, like have all my verbal linguistic learners in one part of the room, and my logical mathematical in another, and the visual spatial in another part, so that I can give assignments to my students for small group work that has everybody with the same multiple intelligence or learning style. Or I can say I want 4, in this case, that was on the screen, 4 students, 1 from each of these categories, so they all bring different skills to the teaching, to the lesson. So here is a wonderful instrument. I want to connect this now to something that Becky talked to us about. And that is that building of relationships is so critical in your classrooms, and especially now with all the traumatic experiences and worries that these youngsters have. These tools that we're sharing with you now are wonderful tools for youngsters to really connect with their teachers and vice versa, so that you have a deeper understanding, I think, of them, and they feel understood. So these are some of my very favorite. Now, this one is new. We put it in this morning. So my poor translators are going to have new work to do, but I love this form, and I thought I'd put it in, but I hadn't. This is a secondary version, and I'm just going to read you 2 or 3 of these sentences. Now, how do I like to use them? At secondary level, I like to have the students fill them out themselves. At elementary, I might interview the child for the information. But at secondary level, and then maybe put them into some pair share groups, pairing off together to talk about their various answers to these questions, and then perhaps putting posters around the room so that we can mark what are the various interests in the classroom, or learning is fun when what? Question number 4. Oh, I did tell you I'd read you a few. Here we go. 3 words that describe me are. Every student would put 3 words. Things I like to do when I am not at school are. The subject I do best at in school is. Someday I'd like to do what? So all of these questions are fabulous for teachers. I love this one. I like to get praise for. Now you know what motivates them. This is another bit of information that we would have. So this one is very, very helpful. Now, for you as secondary teachers, many of you, most of you, I would guess, perhaps have multiple class periods. First class period, second, third, all 45 minutes each. One thing that you might do is all of you decide on next Friday, we're going to give this instrument to all of our classes, our last class of the day. And then as you collect this, you then have this format completed and can share it with your colleagues, the teachers that have the youngsters in the first period of the day and the second period. So all of you have the same information, but you only took one class period in one day to get the full information from all of the students, and then you share it. So I really think that that I always said for myself as a teacher, and believe it or not, I started as a teacher of blind children who were blind or partially sighted. But when I had this information about my students, I really knew how to grab them and get their interest because they've told me what's really important to them. So I want to, you know what? I want to go back. And the reason I want to go back, so I'm going to make you a little bit dizzy, but I'm going to go here and say, now you see that you have the information you need to indicate for Frances that she is a visual learner and that she is, let's see, her learning styles are interpersonal, are naturalistic. And then I have the information I need here to interest, hobbies, and motivators so that, and my recommendation to you is to create yourself a spreadsheet so that you have your students and you have, you have all the information you need for, remember what we had on our IDT, our instructional design tool. Remember what we had a place for you to indicate what the students' interests are or how you might hook them into their learning. Now, there's one other question that is asked in that first top part of the form, and it asks, what do the students know? Whoop, I beg your pardon, I dropped something. What do your students know? Now, we've brought you 2 strategies here. This is part of what's in your material. It will be there for you. You will have the descriptions of the strategies we've brought for you. And teachers tell me they really like this. They didn't want a lot of writing on it. They wanted a lot of white showing like I do. And so here are the 2 strategies we brought. This is 4 corners. It helps you, this strategy, to pre-assess. Remember how much we know that we need to know what these youngsters know before we design our lesson. So it helps to identify pre-existing knowledge of content, concepts, topics, or skills to be studied by the students. In each of these forms, it has a list or a set of steps for how you will follow to use 4 corners. And then glance down at the bottom at that orange. I don't know if yours is orange, but mine is form. And in this little square rectangle that you're going to give every one of your students that morning, it has taken out, and in this case, the teacher is teaching literary or literature, forms of literature. So he puts the topic in the box, and then you're going to give them a chance to write on this form and tell you what they know about each of these 4 quadrants of this box, a rectangle. You ask the question, define for me historical fiction. define nonfiction, define biography, or define poetry. Now, your students will have a little bit of room here to write their definition. Now, you've not taught them this yet. You are preparing to teach them these 4 examples of the forms of literature. But this way, you will know before you even start teaching what they really know and what they need a good deal more instruction about. And you can break this into any piece you want. If I had given you one of these this morning, or it's morning for me, afternoon for you. If I had given you one of these and we had the luxury of some more time, I would have said topic, differentiated instruction. And I would have asked you to define content, how you or give examples of how you would differentiate content. The next box over, I would say, give me examples of differentiating teacher process, how you teach. I might have said in the third box, give me examples of how you would identify have different ways of assessing student knowledge. And maybe that fourth box over there, I would say, give me examples as teachers of some of your tools that you like to use or your favorite strategies. Now, if I had had the chance to give you that form at the beginning of our lesson today, just look at how much information I have about you all and where I need what content I need to emphasize and what you've already mastered. Now, another piece here is the gallery walk. And I will leave that to you to read about. It's very well described, but basically you put posters, like poster board around your classroom, give kids markers, break them into small groups, and they rotate around to each of the posters where you would have a question. Like, what is your favorite strategy for when I, as a teacher, prepare for your lesson? Name one of your favorite instructional strategies. And the kids would go to that poster and write one of those strategies. It's all really described here. But when I finish, I'm going to know what they know before I start teaching. So I'm going to take us back to our form. Now I am going to drop in my form that I chose to use 4 corners. And I want to have my students provide an example of differentiated content, process, assessment, and learning environment. So see, I'm beginning to use the form to begin to plan my lesson. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies as teachers that you might use. Perhaps I should, this would probably be difficult with 136 of you, but does anyone have a question at this point about the form or how the approach I'm taking? Anyone? I think you could put it in the chat box or perhaps you can unmute your, I don't know. So Oksana, how might we do that?
Дуже дякую, шановні учасники. Якщо у вас з'являються питання, можете написати в чаті або зараз підняти ручку, якщо це прям терміново, або просто залишаєте в чаті. І я хочу ще раз наголосити, що абсолютно всі матеріали, які ви зараз бачите, всі форми, всі таблиці, вони є перекладені українською мовою, і ви можете їх використовувати для своєї роботи.
Anybody has a question? Probably not, because it was so well taught. Just kidding. Okay. I'm going to continue on, and if you're writing or typing in a question, you can bring it up for me anytime, Oksana, okay? So now you see what we do with this form. We have ways of determining the answers to each of the segments here. And now we're going to move over to, let's see, we're going to look at the instructional strategies that you choose. All right. So let's move along. Now you have lots of these in your packet. And one of them that I chose to talk about today is one of my favorite strategies. It's called differentiated lecture. Now you're going to remember, I think, that the research that was done about what strategies the teachers use showed us that we often use and reuse strategies over and over and over again. And one of them that most every teacher uses a great deal, is the one on lecture. We like to lecture. We like to talk. We like to lecture. We like to share information. And plus, lecture is the quickest way to impart the largest amount of content. If you lecture, you're talking about the content, and you're going to be able to share all the information you want to share within a fairly short period of time. So one of the problems, and I bet you have chewing gum. Do you have chewing gum in the Ukraine? Anybody have chewing gum in your country, in a store?
Так,
You need
звичайно.
children to use it? Of course you do. All right, now here goes my example. What we do wrong is we take 30, 40 minutes like I'm doing, and we lecture. Well, this wonderful analogy of what we're doing, we need to get with differentiated lecture. What we need to do is take little breaks. Every 10 minutes, we need to break up the lecture with an activity or with a way for the students to process what you have provided. And so when you differentiate lecture, you're going to chop up your time with the lecture in these smaller chunks, and you're going to plan something that you're going to ask the students to do. For example, I've lectured 10 minutes perhaps, and then I say to the students, okay, now turn to your partner and think of the main idea that we've shared so far about differentiated instruction. And so you give them about 2 or 3 minutes, and they turn to their partner and they debrief with that. Then I lecture another 10 minutes, and then I call them back together and I said, okay, then I want you to jot down, let's say the reason, maybe one of your favorite strategies here, the reason why, the rationale for using differentiated instruction, or what have you. And so I'm breaking this down. I might even have them stand up and talk to a peer so I can add motion into it. But this gives you all kinds of examples on this description. What my analogy about chewing gum is like this. When you lecture for 30 minutes, it's like giving a child a piece of gum, and they start chewing it, and then you give them another piece. So, okay, great, that's delicious. They keep chewing and their mouth is more full. And then you give them another piece of chewing gum and they chew all of that. And now their mouths are really full of chewing gum. And so when we lecture without any stops in between, we have given the youngsters so much information that they did not have time to process it. And by stopping every 10 or 15 minutes or 20, what we've done is we've given the brain time to catch up and to process that information. So what we've learned is by giving those breaks and giving the students some way of taking a pause and thinking about what that really meant to them, or what the question they may have, or how they could use that content, whatever you do, however you do it, by giving them that break, the brain actually has a better place to put that knowledge and store it. So our youngsters learn it more quickly, and they can retrieve it when they need to either be tested or to use the knowledge in an activity. So this is a very, very successful strategy in terms of student performance, student learning. So, and one of my favorite, because you know that the student can suddenly get choked with all that chewing gum. So we're going to give them an opportunity instead to chew or process that content. So what am I going to do? I'm going to drop in that the first way I'm going to teach this unit is I'm going to use differentiated lecture. I'm going to have 3 question and answer segments where I stop them every 10 or 15 minutes and ask them to talk to each other first and the partner first, and then share the questions that they may have. So if I did that differentiated lecture, then it's going to be obvious how I'm going to group them for that. Would be whole group, and then either partner or small group. So see now, good, I am able to vary the way that I group my students, increasing the interest in the activity. So as we know, we have several ways of grouping, not only whole group and individual and pairs, but we can create stations in our classroom, or ta-da, small group work is learning style. We have data on our students' learning styles. So I can group them by all auditory learners, all visual learners. I have the multiple intelligence data from the Howard Gardner instrument. I have what they're interested in from my interview guide, or I may have readiness level for the content. And there are many, 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 many other ways of grouping, but I like this so much because you know what the student hears? They hear, wow, my teacher listened. He or she asked me these questions and she's using that information that I provided to her. So it's a real bonding moment for the teacher and the student. So I'm going to indicate that I would have used whole group and small group in that differentiated lecture. Now, how do I want to assess again? I want to repeat that four corners exercise. And I'm going to not give any cues or clues here. And the students will tell me what they learned about each one of those quadrants, about differentiated instruction or literary types of poetry and so on, whatever I've been teaching. And then I want to take us to a very important piece as I kind of pull this together. The individual supports. This is very, very powerful. And it talks about, well, I'm going to actually put it up on the screen here. You know that I said earlier that every teacher knows that there are 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or more students that may struggle with the lesson that I planned, or may be bored with it because they're really farther ahead in their content. So the last piece of this is to take a minute and list the names of those students for yourself and decide, do I need to accommodate? For example, Frances is so visual that she really did need that graphic organizer, that four corners instrument. And I may need to give her a lecture, or I may need to give a student that's an auditory learner, but also is not reading on grade level. I may need to give that student recorded text so that they can't read the level of the textbook, but they understand it. They cognitively understand the content. So I need to provide them recorded material. I may have a student in my room who fidgets tremendously, cannot get through a task, and maybe what I need for him or her is to give them a task sheet that they check off the task analysis list, the smaller task involved in the activity, so that they can keep on track by completing it on time. Or I may have Oksana, who is very, very bright, and what she needs is not those accommodations, but over here, the curriculum, I can give her a higher level of material to read. I may send her to a library or online to do research on the topic. And then for some of our kids, another option here is on in-class support, that they need some more of your time, or maybe if you have an assistant or a peer. So this is a way to make sure that you have absolutely learning within the reach of every student. Now, I know my colleague Becky is going to groan. She can't believe I'm actually sharing this with you. This is one of my oldest cartoons, but I like it because it really makes the point. The importance of scaffolds, those scaffolds we just talked about, is teachers provide various supports that can be removed as content or skills. As Frances learns more about literary types, she doesn't need that graphic organizer. She does not need that chapter outline. Well, here is my little guy in the gym, and that was never my favorite place, by the way, but he's in a gym exercising, and his coach is hollering, keep going, higher, higher, grab that ring. Well, is the man ever going to reach that ring because it's permanently suspended way above his head? Is he ever going to meet that goal? No. So the scaffolds we're talking about are the teacher's way of bringing that ring within reach of this student or this gentleman who's working out. So everything that I organize in that last component are ways to bring learning within the reach of every student. And that's why we have information for you on the scaffolds lecture notes, word banks, graphic organizers. You have all of this in your material. And so now I drop it into my into my instructional design tool, and I've filled out what I need. And I just need one little piece of paper for my lesson, my unit. And I can use this to co-plan with other teachers so that I might not be the only one using this form, but together we can plan and make half of the work in half the time. So this is a very important piece. So I'm going to put a bow on this. I'm going to end my section with you all, and I'm going to connect it back to Becky's work on trauma. And this is a miniature of one of your tools that you have in your packages. And it is instructional accommodations, how to use them, strategies and suggestions. And you have this in your packet. And so to close my part, everything we've just looked at are very practical teacher strategies. They're supportive of rebuilding relationships with your students. They help with memory and retention. If I'm in trauma, I have a lot of trouble remembering things. It skips my mind as soon as you've taught it to me because I'm distracted by my worries or concerns. It gives me lots of ways for students to engage with each other, to help them focus and attend to what I'm teaching. And what I like the best when we're talking about traumatic environments such as yours at this point is it relieves stress both for the teacher and the student by varying these activities, by giving them something of interest and giving them a role in the classroom instruction. So that is the bow that I put on these strategies. Remember, we're going to have time for questions and answers at the end of Becky's piece. And she's going to have a few minutes to talk now about, well, I'm going to let Becky tell you about what she's going to talk about. Miss Becky?
Thank you, Dr. Stetson. Actually, though, before we move on, there was a question in the chat box for some clarification on what an IEP is. So maybe you can spend about 30 seconds and describe what it is.
Okay, thank you. I thought about taking that out and I thought, well, I will leave it in. In your country, like ours, all over the world, we have about, the estimate is 10 to 12% of our students have a disability. Most of them are very mild. In our country, I don't know what you call them where you are, but we like a learning disability is one where they may have difficulty in reading or in mathematics. I told you I taught blind children, so the disability might be not able to read print, but needed Braille, specialized textbooks. We have children who have an emotional disturbance. There are about 5, well, I won't give a percentage because we may have very different percentages in our countries, but children with emotional concerns or stressors. We have children with cognitive disabilities. The old term was mental retardation. We don't use that phrase anymore. We call it cognitive disability. When a child is identified as having a disability, then we have a law that says that educators must develop with their parent, in concert with their parent, an individualized education program. And that's IEP, so that we have made sure that we've thought of the special things that student needs in order to be successful. And guess what? You remember the piece that I had, the part that looked at scaffolds and accommodations, modifications, in-class support, that last piece? That contains most of the important pieces of the discussion in the IEP meeting that helps us prepare for serving that child this school year in concert with the parent, so that we have a plan of action for helping that child be able to reach the learning that everyone else is learning in the classroom. Thank you for that question. And I know that you have special services in your country for children with disabilities. And I'd like to learn more about that sometime, but that's our law that says we have to have that plan in place. Okay, thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Dr. Stetson. All right, everybody take a deep breath. Let's regulate because we've just had a lot, haven't we? So we've talked about building relationships. We've talked a little bit about how we're going to manage and handle and deal with the learning loss that we have from not only a worldwide pandemic, but then onto a conflict of a whole country. Dr. Stetson has touched on readiness to learn and the varying degrees of how we can enhance that in our classroom and focus on our readiness to teach. So those are all important concepts, but we've not talked about something that's as important. And let's back up, Francis, that last slide for 1 second, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
First of all, we need to remember as instructors, teachers in our classroom, that we're going to want to respond before we react. We're going to also work on limiting the chances of failures. And as Dr. Stetson shared with us, find the opportunities for successes. If you're able to implement those wonderful tools that we've provided into our everyday teaching, then we will be okay, good. And we got this. Our final thoughts. First, be intentional and really plan for your return. I'm not sure if you're actually on your semester break or where you are in the scope and sequence of your school year. I know our school year is coming to a close and we're just about to go into our summer break or vacation. So you have some time probably before you go back to your classrooms. Start with a welcoming energy. Go over the top with these students for predictability, routine, structure, all of those things. We talked about that goodness of fit and that ability to attend. That's done when they feel safe and they know their teacher is going to be the same today as she was yesterday. My routine is predictable. If I have a problem or a question, there'll be an answer. All very important. And lastly, have a plan when things do go wrong, because as you know, in life, things go wrong. Ready, Francis?
Yes. All right. Well, what we're ready for, actually. Oh, there we are. Definition of resilience.
As we come back, we need to focus on really coming back as whole people. And that's very easy in my home right here to say those things. But I do know that there are some things that we can add to our toolbox, and there are some things that we can do to take care of ourselves. And taking care of ourselves is absolutely important right now. There's a concept which we call resilience. And by definition, resilience is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. We do a training on resilience actually, and our graphic is a bouncing ball. So it gives the image of bouncing back. And sometimes, and hopefully, when we develop the resistance skills that we need to be healthy individuals, we bounce back stronger than we were before. Highly resilient people tend to possess 3 common traits. And the first one is acceptance. We have to recognize the reality of what's going on, a physical thing, it could be a health thing, a family thing, it could be a pandemic, it doesn't matter. Recognize and accept it. The next thing is purpose. No matter what, they look forward. They have a purpose for today, they'll have a purpose for tomorrow, and they look forward with hope. And then the third characteristic of someone who is resilient is flexibility. You got to learn to go with the flow, right? But understanding too that there are always options. That is something we know. We always have options, okay? During these challenging times, there are 4 domains of resiliency that are important for us to really focus on. The first one would be physical, and that's our physical body, keeping track of who we are, where we are physically. Are we eating well? Are we sleeping well? Are we doing everything we can to physically stay in shape to do and support our classrooms and in our jobs? The second is mental resilience, and that would be keeping our mind in a place where we know that there's hope and that we can move forward and that there is help and resources if we should need those. That flows right into that emotional resilience, which would include involving people in your life that are supportive and safe for you. And social resilience, that's finding places to let who we are, the essence of who we are, really enjoy and really rest, really go to church, spend time singing, go with friends, go out for a coffee or a meal. Social resilience. All right. So there are a couple of ideas that we can look at to become more resilient. They're pretty simple. One is get connected, build strong, positive relationships with your loved ones, with friends, because they can help provide the support and the hope that you need. Join a faith-related community if that's important to you. The next one is to make every day meaningful. Do something that gives you pleasure. Do something that gives you a sense of accomplishment every single day. Every day set at least one or two clear but achievable goals, something that you can look forward to and something that's going to build your future and give you some meaning. The next one is to remain hopeful. You can't change the past, but you can always look forward to the future. So sometimes accepting and even anticipating that change will come again and it will happen can make it a little less filled with anxiety, because we will all face challenges. Take care of yourself. Don't forget to tend to your needs. There's a concept in trauma that is called compassion fatigue, and that is by the caregivers, because we are all caregivers. And sometimes we get tired of giving the care. I know you understand this, and I know this is happening. But find activities and hobbies that help you, that physical activities, sleep, eating healthy, practicing stress management and incorporate those into your daily routines. And the last one is to be proactive. Don't ignore your problems, but instead figure out what needs to be done, how you can make a plan maybe to take action, and realizing and recognizing also that it will take time to recover from major setbacks that you've experienced in your life, traumatic events, loss, but situations will improve if we work on them. So it's really been an honor. I'm going to let Francis close in 1 second. It really has been an honor to be with you. We want you to know that you will be continually in our thoughts and our prayers, and we thank you and want you to know that the world knows what is happening in your world, and we're here to support you in whatever way we can. Thank you. And Dr. Stetson?
Oh, I just want to say what an honor it's been for us to do this session for you. And I want to remind you, if you think of something you might want or need, a tool, a strategy, whatever, an idea about a book to read or what have you, please call on us, and we're here. We'll send it. I know our translators are going, oh no, more paper, because we sent a lot. But I hope that you find a use for it. Now we want to move over to the Q&A part. Questions. Do you have any questions for us? And let me also say we'll answer as many as we can. And if there are some left over, we will answer them and send them to Oksana, the answers, and you can disseminate them and share it with the answers with everyone. Okay? And thank you all again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to stop sharing so that we see each other. Oh, there you are. Love it. Oh, what happened?
Дуже вам дякую. Дякую за чудову презентацію. Шановні учасники, якщо у вас з'явилися питання, будь ласка, пишіть їх в чаті, ми зможемо їх проговорити. І у нас насправді є один коментар, скажімо так, від Софії. З вашого дозволу зачитаю тоді українською, але в чаті він є англійською мовою. Ми маємо, це стосовно теми, коли обговорилася інклюзія, тобто ми маємо ситуацію, коли студенти з особливими освітніми потребами, вони навчаються в звичайному класі з іншими студентами, але при цьому мають асистента, тобто людину, яка допомагає вчителю працювати з цими дітьми. Це стосовно питання, яке обговорювалося до цього. Так, маємо запитання від пані Анастасії. Як слід поводитися вчителю, якщо дитина поводить себе визиваюче, вживає нецензурну лексику та створює конфлікти з іншими дітьми, намагаючись таким чином привернути до себе увагу через її нестачу?
Wow. That's a big question, one that requires a lot of background and behavior. Becky, you want to take it, or you want to take it from a behavioral point of view of looking at what's causing what the student is asking for, really what they really need, and how we construct a plan around that, or do you want to deal with it from a trauma point of view?
Well, I'll start and then I'm going to hand it off to
Okay.
you. I think you hit it on the head right there, that we have to look at why the student is exhibiting the behavior. And that's a question that we always ask when we look at behavior, is what's happening? What happened first? Maybe then, of course, why is that student exhibiting the behavior? I think that it certainly is an indication of a student that's under trauma and under stress. I can't imagine you have many students that aren't. Although there are students that are just behavior students no matter what, and we all have met them in our lifetime. I know this. So Francis?
I have an idea that you might like to have. We have something that we use called a functional behavior analysis. You know, we always have to have big words for little things, but it's a wonderful set of questions that the teacher can ask or answer about, as Becky said, what is the purpose for that behavior? Is the child seeking attention? Is that child seeking to avoid work we're about to give them? And then it asks, again, what happened right before the child had a behavioral incident? What happens during and what happens after? So there's some wonderful questions that turn you into a detective as a teacher that helps you analyze what is the purpose for that behavior for that child. And then what would be some appropriate responses on the part of the teacher. Now, we have a wonderful resource that not only talks about how you analyze the student's behavior, but talks about what are some of your options as teachers. And that's a whole other class, a whole other course, but we will send that to you. And I know you'll need to give Oksana and her team time to translate it, but I think you're all going to find it very helpful. To use Becky's words earlier, it's proactive and it's positive. It tries to get ahead of the behavior before it happens in the next time so that you can avoid it altogether if possible. Other questions?
Дуже дякую. Є коментар від пані Олі. Зараз, секунду, я його знайду, позагубила. Це стосовно практик відновлення, така рекомендація також дуже цікава. Можна використовувати практику наміри на день. Кожного вечора писати наміри все те, що ви плануєте зробити, особливо для себе, а ввечері дякувати собі за все, що зробили і не зробили. Це допомагає відновлюватися. Дуже дякую за цікавий кейс.
Yes.
Yes, I do too. And we have a funny thing we do here in America. We say, kiss your brain. Thank yourself for doing what you needed to do for yourself. We must do that. Yes.
Other comments? Я хотіла б просто зачитати слова подяки, тому що вони дійсно неймовірні від наших учасників. Це реальні практичні кейси, дуже корисні, цінні, актуальні. Дякуємо за чудовий вебінар. Так, надзвичайно цікаві інструменти для навчання. Дякуємо за змістовний та практичний матеріал. Щиро вам дякую за досвід, чудовий матеріал, ваші позитивні емоції, активність, просто заряд бадьорості. Так, дякуємо за мотиваційну сесію. Ви неймовірні, дуже актуально та змістовно. І бажаємо всім учасникам бути в ресурсі.
Fabulous. Well, we feel better now. I think Becky and I can now go to lunch, you know? But I hope someday that we can see you all in person. I would really love that. So take care. Thanks. All right.
Ще раз хочу подякувати Френсіс і Бекі за те, що були сьогодні з нами і надали дуже багато корисних матеріалів. Шановні учасники, на цьому ще не завершується наш переклад. Ми ще перекладемо і підручник для вас, тому будемо вас тримати в курсі. І я хочу сказати, що усі матеріали будуть доступні на сайті, який ви отримуєте в запрошенні, в листі запрошенні, і також на вашу пошту надійде форма відгук для отримання сертифікату. Будь ласка, дуже важливо пишіть своє ім'я і прізвище для того, щоб ми могли правильно вказати все в сертифікаті. І якщо у вас будуть якісь питання, пишіть нам, і ми з радістю будемо вам допомагати. Дякую всім за участь в цьому чудовому проєкті і до нових зустрічей.
Дякую, до побачення.
Дякуємо, до побачення.
Дякуємо. Дякуємо.